Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown because, in TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever. Hello there, and welcome to episode 98 of TheKillFile. I am so glad that you guys are back for another story. Before we jump into today's case, a few quick reminders. First off, the hidden files are on a break, but they will eventually be back. For now, if you're interested in hearing the kinds of stories they will be, you can hear a few on here, our regular channel, or you can head over to Patreon and find a few to check out. If you haven't yet, check out the website, TheKillFile.com, where you can learn a little more about how TheKillFile got started. While you are there, you can find the listener files form, suggest a case you want me to cover, or you can look up the merch shop. The merch shop is a fun place to find some true crime gear that also helps to support the podcast. Next, if you haven't yet, please take a second to rate, review, follow, or subscribe to TheKillFile wherever you get your podcasts for the newest episodes every Monday. It's one of the best ways to support the podcast that is free for all, and it only takes a moment. Finally, follow us on social media. We are on Blue Sky, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and of course, YouTube. If you're interested in talking all things true crime and or more of my personal musings, you can find my public page on Facebook at my name, followed by TheKillFile. Okay, that's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. Today, we are going to be talking about someone that I had never heard of, and honestly, I don't even know how the story is going to end. A man named Edgar Cooke, aka the Night Caller. Trigger warnings for today are going to be bullying, domestic abuse, rape, necrophilia, and murder. Let's jump in. Today's case is going to take us all the way to Western Australia, more specifically Perth. Australia. I just have to say that you guys are seriously some badasses out there. I have seen the size of the spiders that live amongst you, and I honestly don't know how you handle that shit. Why are they so big? Oh my god, I want to visit Australia, but I'm honestly too fucking scared. As I was scripting this part of the episode, I looked up what Australian spiders are like, and I just cannot get over how fucking huge they are. Holy shit, how do you guys do it? Moving on. In 1931, Perth was going through some periods of unrest, not just economically, but also civilly as well. In 1929, there was a huge stock market crash that devastated workers everywhere, which left thousands relying on the government to help keep them afloat and alive. Of course, the Great Depression had its hooks across the world with so many people living in poverty, just hoping that one day things would get better. Protests would erupt against a premier named James Mitchell. Okay, Australia, please excuse my ignorance. I don't know shit about your country or government. Actually, I don't know shit about most countries, but I want to learn. So I had to look up what a premier was. And for anyone else who doesn't know, it's like the top person in the government in one of Australia's states, to which there are 6. New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, Western Australia, South Australia, and Tasmania. So, for context, Perth is not only the largest city, but also the capital of Western Australia. That way we all know for today's case. The biggest march or protest that would take place in 1931 was on March 6th, where I guess just thousands of people who were now unemployed marched on the Treasury building, which then led to something now famous called the Treasury Riot. At the time, men who were unemployed had to wait a week before they could apply for governmental help, and then they would receive what is equivalent today to less than $5 a day in the form of 1 shilling back then, and this was to support the man, his wife, and up to 5 children. So imagine trying to support your family on less than $5 a day. Clearly, that's not enough, and your family would most likely be on the streets. Hence, the march took place and protests, asking for more support from the government. Life was slower for Perth back in 1931 due to the fact that it wasn't quite urbanized the way it needed to be, rather just seemingly overpopulated without the infrastructure needed to sustain its citizens. Not only were citizens struggling with poverty and such, but also there was a horrific flood in March that flooded city streets and messed with power and radio services. This brings us to right before, seemingly the worst month for Perth in 1931, when Edgar Cooke would be born on February 25th, 1931. Cooke was born to parents Vivian and Christine Cooke in Victoria Park, Perth. Now, today's case is going to come with a little lesson in not bullying people. I'm not saying that this is the reason that Cooke becomes a serial killer, but I can promise you that bullying as a child severely affects the rest of that person's life. In fact, we're going to learn a little bit about that now. As I was learning this case, I was kind of curious, like the effects of severe bullying and what that can do to a person as they grow up. See, Eric Cooke was born with something called cleft palate. Cleft palate, for anyone who doesn't exactly know, is a congenital condition, meaning someone is born with this. So cleft palate is when a baby is born without the full development of the roof of their mouth, called the palate. During development, a fetus with this condition is left when the roof of their mouth doesn't join together as it's supposed to. So when the baby's born, it can have either a split on one side or sometimes both sides of the mouth. Some are considered just a cleft lip, where it doesn't seem that the bone is involved, while others involve the bone or the palate, and they can range from mild to severe. Now, they don't exactly know what causes cleft palate, except that it is believed that genetics along with environmental factors can be included. So, if either of the parents have cleft lip or palate in their family, it could be a risk factor, as well as the fetus being exposed to specific chemicals during the early weeks of pregnancy, as well as things like alcohol, tobacco, and some medications, or lack of specific vitamins during the first trimester of a pregnancy. It's not always genetic, and it's one of the most common birth defects that happen. Now, people who have conditions since birth are more likely to get bullied, as I'm sure we have all seen or we know. Someone born with cleft palate, an arm or foot that maybe didn't fully develop, or any type of mental disabilities are oftentimes bullied, made fun of, and left with some severe social anxieties because, let's be honest, kids and people in general can be fucking assholes. In my own house, I understand that my boys want to rip on each other and tease each other and bond in a way that siblings can sometimes bond, but I stop my children from making fun of anything a person cannot change. If they want to tease each other about a haircut or something, although I don't like it, I fully believe that there's a huge difference in teasing each other about something that can be changed or will change versus something that someone is born with, like hair color, body issues, or a birth defect. That is absolutely not okay in my eyes. Kids who are bullied from a young age are left with lifelong issues, especially if it's ongoing bullying, like someone born with a physical deformity. According to HCA Healthcare, childhood bullying like taunting, remarks, and snubbing from peers is traumatic and can leave a person with not only mental health issues, but even physical. It affects the child's ability to learn, to sleep, or even develop correctly. But even further than that, it affects people as they're adults. We all have issues that stem from our childhood, as it does affect the rest of our life, but ongoing bullying has major adverse effects. Teens that get bullied have significantly more risks of having things like anxiety disorders, depression, panic disorders, or even agoraphobia, which isn't just someone who stays home, afraid to leave the house. It's also characterized as someone who may struggle with certain social situations or places, and they may avoid them due to anxiety. Adults can grow to have PTSD from the experiences, anxiety, depression, trust issues, intimacy issues, avoidance issues, and even physical things like inflammation, weakened immune systems, and are at greater risk for heart disease, chronic pain, and autoimmune disorders. I had no idea. Long-term stress like that of bullying just causes a plethora of health and mental issues, so my purpose in sharing this stuff, besides the fact that it links to today's case, is maybe if we realize as adults how much our own childhood affects us, we can teach our own children that their actions and their quote-unquote teasing others can have lifelong, lasting effects. Imagine finding out that you were the cause of another human being's lifelong suffering from bullying them. Not great. I have some links in the show notes if you want to read more on this stuff. It's just super interesting to me. Okay, so back to Cooke. Not only was he born with cleft palate, but his father, Vivian, was a raging, violent alcoholic. His parents were said to have only married because his mother was pregnant with Eric because he was the oldest of the three siblings, having two younger sisters. Cooke was unfortunately beaten by his father with regular consistency, and this rings especially true if he came between his father trying to physically hurt his mother, Christine. This, according to the Big Book of Serial Killers, Volume 2. Cooke's father seemed to absolutely loathe him, and while beating him, he would often use twigs or even his belt. And sadly, these beatings could also stem from nothing, even provoking his father, other than his father's own feelings. Sources said that Cooke landed in the hospital many times, with the excuse always being that Cooke had hurt himself on accident. Cooke would find any excuse to stay away from his house because of his father, and on occasions this would see him in orphanages or foster homes. The men who worked with Vivian also knew that he was a drunk, and many said that he had a quick temper. Eventually, while Cooke was in the hospital for one reason or another, it was suspected that he may have actually suffered from some type of brain injury or damage due to some blackouts that he had had along with horrific headaches. I wondered myself if this was something that he was born with or possibly from all the atrocious beatings that he took at the hand of his father. I mean, if they were bad enough to land him in the hospital numerous times, I can only imagine what had been done to him, and I don't think it's a stretch to think that he could have some brain damage. The kids at school were horrible to Cooke, teasing him and making fun of his mouth. Whether it was the way it looked or how he talked, the kids were cruel. Cooke learned to be revengeful and nasty back in a way to stand up for himself against his tormentors. His mother, Christine, was said to be the loving parent that helped with some of the neighboring kids taking a small liking to Cooke. She would offer them a little snack, despite the family being so poor, which seemed to allow Cooke to come and play with a group of kids. It was said that on days like this, when Cooke may have felt like a sense of belonging and fun, well, this would be quashed when his drunken father would come home to be abusive towards his children and wife. However, it seemed Vivian was never sorry the next day, as he was with the rest of his family when it came to his son, Eric. Vivian never seemed to fully accept his son, and of course his mom couldn't protect herself, let alone her son, from the abuse, which must have been just horrific to be a part of and to witness. Seriously, this is just trauma from every angle for this poor mother and her children. Although Cooke went through surgeries for his cleft palate, trying to repair what doctors could, they never 100% fixed everything, which led to bullying for Cooke at every age and at every school, sadly. Cooke was known to be sick often from school, and when he was there, he got into trouble pretty often. Sources said back then it was when teachers reprimanded students with an object, like a cane. So just being smacked around from your parents to your teacher must have left Cooke with no adult to trust and feel safe with. Remember that it's alright to feel sorry for the younger versions of these monsters. You can loathe and hate someone, but still feel sorry for them. It doesn't mean that you condone their actions. There are plenty of people who come from shitty backgrounds who don't turn out to be killers. Cooke was said to be a fairly good student in most of his subjects, except for math and possibly science. It was not his best. And when Cooke turned 14 years old, back then this was the age that you needed to be in order to leave school, he dropped out as his father sent him off to work. Cooke took a job as a delivery boy for a local store and turned his money over to his mom to help out the family. On top of everything else going on, Cooke was said to be somewhat accident-prone, which, same, for real. I'm like a walking accident waiting to happen, so I feel him there. Cooke would end up with injuries from lots of workplaces. After trying to work on a farm, he was bit by a snake, and that was it for that job. One source said there was a particular incident where he was working at a factory when a winch smacked him in the face, specifically his nose, and put him in the hospital. Another time, when he was just 16 years old and working as a hammer boy in a workshop, whatever that is, he would be injured by steam to the face, resulting in facial burns. He hurt one of his thumbs and another injury to his hand, all while working at the same place but on different occasions. All of the nights roaming as a kid would eventually lead to petty crimes. By this time, Cooke was around 17 years old. He was still trying to stay away from his home at night to save himself from his father's drunken wrath. So, Cooke started with crimes and vandalism. His mother would sometimes spend the night at her work when she was working at a local hotel just trying to escape her husband's abuse. Cooke would get a little pocket change from his mother to spend, but he also was known to steal some money or food where he could. Cooke would be caught and sentenced to 18 months in jail for, I guess, burning down a church after he had been rejected for the church choir, which makes sense because he hadn't exactly learned how to handle stress or anger from his father figure if his dad got physical every time he was angry. After Cooke was caught for some of his petty crimes, he would keep the newspaper articles from them and he would try to impress people with them. While Cooke had joined a surf life saving club, he was able to make a few friends, and wanting to impress them, he had stolen a watch and engraved it himself to make it seem as though it was bestowed to him for all of his good work within the club. However, the theft was found out and the watch was returned. Although Cooke had joined the club to basically become a lifeguard, he still suffered from headaches and blackouts to the point where, on a few occasions, he had to be rescued himself, which would be the reason the club gave to let Cooke go from its group. Sources said that the real reason was because Cooke was a little klepto and people kept finding their shit missing. I guess he wanted to impress people and gain their approval, which led him to doing some reckless stuff. For example, there was a time where he dove off a ledge of a 50-foot cliff and hurt himself. Stammering and climbing out of the water, he was in pain for days when he was finally admitted to the hospital where they took x-rays, and thankfully nothing had been broken. But they did go ahead and address issues that he had been having with his sinuses. On one of the x-rays for this, it actually was found out that he had a blood clot that had calcified over time. It was underneath the lining of the tissue of his brain. So in 1947, he had surgery, a craniotomy, and it removed the calcification. This was said to help with the headaches and blackouts. Cooke then turned to the army, with sources saying that he absolutely loved it there, and it was finally something that he thought he would be good at. He was a great shot, and even with the military telling him that because he had a speech impediment, there would not be a chance for him to get a higher rank other than Lance Corporal that he was currently at, it didn't seem to deter Cooke from wanting to try his very best, and maybe he was even proud to belong somewhere and feel a part of something bigger. This makes me so fucking mad that he was told that he couldn't be promoted because he had speech issues. Like, what in the fuck? That's so common. And what does it have to do with someone's intelligence? I mean, I guess this was the later 40s, so what did they know? But still, I absolutely loathe the history of this country in concerns to women, mental health, race, and sexual preferences. I mean, I know that we have come a long way, but as I fit into many of these categories, I can tell you that we are still fighting for equal rights, civil rights, and although it seems like a long time ago that we struggled with these problems, they are still so very present in our everyday lives. And it makes me so mad how old-fashioned and old-thinking so many people still are. Ugh, I hope the future generations are more accepting than ours or our parents' were or are. Hate breeds hate. Anyways, Cooke was only able to spend a few months with the army because once they found out about his criminal history as a youth, they discharged him. After this, Cooke returned to breaking and entering into homes with what was said to be a bitter and angry mindset towards people he deemed better off than him. I guess, understandably, Cooke was angry at the world after the world treated him the way that everyone did. He was angry that other people didn't get beaten by their fathers the way that he did. He was angry that other people didn't have the birth defect that he did. And this was the cause of so much of his pain since birth. And he was also angry that he barely had a penny to his name while others had more than they needed. The authorities were able to keep some of Cooke's fingerprints from some of the break-ins, specifically on a wine bottle during one of the crimes, and they kept the prints on file. While Cooke was in various homes, he didn't just steal food and valuables, but he took his anger out on other people that he felt hatred towards by destroying their homes and their property. In one particular instance, Cooke ransacked the home and then set the man's house on fire, ruining some of his furniture. There was one woman who was kinder to Cooke than most, 2 neighbors down from him. Her name was Mrs. Mason, and she had been married to a police officer. While the husband and herself had been away, they asked Cooke to watch their home for them, giving him a key. Well, he wanted to steal from them, even though she was so nice to him. But he didn't want to get caught, so he broke a window to make it look like a robbery. While he was angry and inside their home, after seeing what they had, knowing that he didn't have it, he gathered a bunch of the neighbors' clothing and doused it in a chemical ready to set it on fire. However, he ended up not being able to find any matches, so he couldn't. Not long after his continued burglary and arson, he would move a little north of Perth to his grandmother's home because he was dying to get away from his father's house. Why this wasn't thought of before, I do not know, but I wonder what could have been for Cooke. During one break-in, the husband and wife were home when the wife was wakened by a sound of an intruder. She then woke her husband up and told him someone was in their home. The husband was quietly going about the house looking for the prowler when Cooke had snatched the woman's purse and took it into the bathroom to have a look. The man of the house confronted Cooke. When thinking quickly on his feet, Cooke told the man that he was a neighbor that had drunkenly meant to go to his own place, but somehow made it into theirs. Well, the man wasn't stupid and didn't believe him, of course, so they fought a little, and Cooke eventually threw a good enough punch to escape, dropping his flashlight on the way out. The police figured out who Eric Cooke was within a week of breaking and entering this home, and this is when he would be brought in for questioning from his grandmother's house. This was March 12, 1949. Cooke had evidence that he was involved by having items from different homes that he had broken into, and now they had his fingerprints they had collected from the various break-ins, tying them to Cooke. Cooke confessed to these crimes, giving them a sob story about not making enough in order to give his mother. Nevertheless, he was arrested and sentenced to 3 years in prison for his crimes. After he was let out, around the age of 21, he would meet the woman who was to become his wife, a young waitress, 18-year-old Sarah Levine, but she went by the name of Sally. They would marry after Sally had turned 19 at the Methodist Church in a place called Cannington. Sally would later be quoted saying about her husband, "I was 18 when I met him, 19 when I married him. He was quite nice. He was 21 and the most handsome-looking bloke." End quote. The couple would go on to have 7 children together, having 3 girls and 4 boys, which is just insane. Like, how do people do that? How do you have that many kids? Holy shit. During the course of their marriage, Cooke was still committing crimes and getting caught for some of them, like theft and for being a peeping Tom. He was also caught for stealing cars, as he would sometimes find the keys left inside, take them for what can only be thought of as a joyride, and then at times he would just bring them back. However, in 1955, Cooke accidentally crashed one of the cars, and this sent him to the hospital. He was then caught and ended up being in trouble. He was convicted of using the car unlawfully and for this sentenced to 2 years of hard labor. You would think that Cooke had learned from his mistakes of getting caught over and over, but no. Instead, he learned how to become a better criminal and started wearing women's gloves during his crimes so that he wouldn't leave fingerprints at the crime scenes. Towards the end of November, on the 25th, in 1958, Cooke would break into a home in a place called Applecross, where he bludgeoned a 15-year-old girl named Molly McLeod as she was sleeping, but she would survive. Her parents were able to find her, although she wasn't making any sense and was covered in blood. The crime seemed to be motiveless, and they were never able to identify the weapon that Cooke used to attack the young girl. Only 1 month later, another attack happened when he had been stalking a young woman for a few days and ended up stealing her father's car, then used it to hit a woman on purpose who had been on a bike. Cooke hit a woman named Kathy Bellis. Thankfully, the woman was also able to survive, despite the fact that she was launched almost 60 feet when she was hit. These 2 attacks seemed to be attempts of murder that were unsuccessful. Unfortunately, many of his victims would not be so lucky. Cooke's first murder that is known would take place the next month, January 30th, when he would break into an apartment of Penny Berkman, and he attacked her. I guess she heard Cooke breaking into her bedroom window, and when she woke up, she saw him just standing there in her bedroom. She tried to fight Cooke, which good for her for being so brave, but sadly, her killer was able to overpower her, stabbing her to death in her own bed with a knife. Sources said the fatal stab went straight to Penny's heart. Cooke was able to subdue his darker side as far as the killer went for at least until the end of summer, well, our summer, and on August 8th, still in 1959, he would attack his next victim. 17-year-old nursing student Alex Duncan had been asleep in her bed in her apartment when she woke up to a strange man standing in her room. I can't imagine the fear of waking up and seeing someone just standing there. Cooke then proceeded to attack Alex, bashing her in the head before fleeing the crime scene, but thankfully, and I have no idea how, Alex would survive, despite the fact that her skull was actually fractured. She was said in sources to have survived with what I can only imagine was horrific trauma, but ended up with epilepsy that was severe as well. A few months later, in December on the 20th, Cooke broke into an apartment of another young woman that he had been stalking and attacked Jillian Brewer with an axe, killing her. The deranged killer then used a pair of scissors to mutilate Jillian's body after her death. For this murder, there would be a wrongful conviction of a man named Daryl Beamish, where sadly this man spent 15 years in prison for a murder he did not commit. Sources said that Daryl was only 18 when he was wrongfully arrested for the murder and sadly was deaf as well as mute. Later, during Cooke's trial, because spoiler alert, he does get caught, he would say about his actions, quote, "I just wanted to hurt people." A few months after the murder of Jillian came another hit and run where Cooke stole another vehicle driving down a street in Bayswater as he was passing a young woman named Glenys Peake, who was walking home after her evening out. Cooke hit her with the car, which tossed her towards the side of the road. As he was turning the car around to run her over, she was able to get out of there. Good for her, and how fucking scary. Another survivor of a hit and run was a young lady named Jill Connell, who on May 13, 1960, was also walking home. Cooke hit her with a car, and when he did, I guess she hit the windshield before being tossed to the side of the street, and although she was severely injured, she did survive. Just 1 week later, in another car on May 20th, Cooke hit a group of 3 that were walking near Queen's Park. 2 cousins named Maureen Rogers and Therese Zagami were walking along with their friend Georgia Pittman as the car struck. Now, Therese was able to move out of the way in time, but he did hit Georgia and Maureen, although they both survived. As Maureen was the one injured the most due to taking the brunt force of the hit, she was left with medical issues that were ongoing. I don't know why it blows my mind that this killer was on such an angry rampage that he was willing to mow down people in a fucking car as they were walking. I know that this still happens, but it's just so brazen. As far as we know, Cooke didn't strike again for another 2 years, which seems to be just a huge gap for someone rampaging the way that he was. Maybe it was the birth of some of his children, or maybe there were more that we just don't know about. On March 3rd, 1962, Cooke was able to walk into a home that had sadly been unlocked, where a 23-year-old woman named Anne Melvin had been asleep. She was woke by Cooke trying to strangle her with a towel around her neck, and although she did pass out, she was still alive. Sources said that Cooke heard something in another area, and when he went to go see what it was, thankfully for Anne, this is when she woke up and started screaming, which scared Cooke, and he ran off. She saved her own life. Another woman who was lucky enough to save her own life was a woman named Peggy Fleury, who had been asleep in something that was like a little cottage, maybe off the back of another house or even her own, but either way, Peggy woke up to Cooke trying to undress her, and she started screaming. Cooke punched Peggy in the face with his hand and again with his flashlight, which would later require Peggy to have surgery on her face, but because she kept on screaming, Cooke fled. The next attack would come on Australia Day in 1963, so January 26th, when Cooke decided to go on a shooting rampage. He had broken into a home where he was able to find some valuables and money when he happened upon a .22 caliber rifle with some ammo, and he took them. At 2:40 a.m., so this would technically be on the 27th, now in a suburb near the beach called Cottesloe, sorry if I butchered that, there was a middle-aged couple parked in their vehicle when they saw Cooke, who they said was lurking across the street from their car. I guess the man told Cooke to get lost and threw a beer bottle at him. This is when the killer rushed to the car and opened fire on the couple, injuring them both. The woman was reported to have pushed her hand over her boyfriend's head and down when Cooke shot, so the bullet went through her hand and into the man's neck. But the couple was able to take off in their car, heading to Fremantle Hospital, saving them both. After this, Cooke was walking when he picked a random house that had a balcony off of the garage, and when he was able to climb up, seeing the second balcony doors were open, he got to it and used his rifle to shoot a 29-year-old accountant named Brian Weir in the head. Although Weir survived the initial shooting after hours of surgery with some severe brain injuries, he would sadly die a few years later because of the damage to his brain, and one source would say that he suffered every day after the attack all the way until he died, which is just, it's heartbreaking that death may have been welcomed by this poor man after what he went through. It's so unfair and so fucking unnecessary. After shooting Brian, Cooke just started going door to door, looking for more people to kill. A 19-year-old young man named John Sturkey was staying at a boarding house and sleeping out on an open-air balcony when Cooke shot and killed him. John was said to be a Queen's Scout and a student of agricultural science, and during the time of his murder, another lodger at the boarding house named Pauline Fenton called the police, saying at first she thought that John was having a bad dream because she could hear him moaning. A 55-year-old man named George Walmsley would open his front door to the knocks or doorbell that came from Cooke, and of course, having no idea, he was opening the door to death. Cooke shot the man in the head, and this was around 3 a.m. Afterwards, his wife and daughter, who was 21 years old, Both found him at the front door on the floor unconscious with the bullet wound in the direct center of his forehead. No one should ever have to find their loved one like that. Now, Perth was on edge. People were starting to lock their doors and windows as the police were looking for the lone gunman deemed responsible for the night of the rampage shootings. Just a few days after Australia Day, on February 9th, Cooke took another car and hit a woman who would die from the accident named Rosemary Anderson. And this was near Shenton Park. After the accident, yet another man was wrongly accused, John Button. He was arrested for his girlfriend Rosemary's murder and eventually confessed to the crime, although my guess is that he was under duress. He went to trial and was convicted to the manslaughter of his girlfriend, being sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. John Button's conviction was not overturned, according to one source, until 2002, even though Cooke had already confessed. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there are some books or maybe even a documentary that specifically focuses on John Button's case when it connects to Cooke. Just 6 days later, February 16th, Cooke broke into another woman's apartment named Lucy Mandrill and strangled his victim to death with the cord of her lamp. Sources then stated he knew she was dead as he raped her body in an act of necrophilia. He then took Lucy from her bed and dragged her to a neighbor's yard, where he proceeded to use a whiskey bottle to violate the woman's corpse, putting it in her hands and then leaving her there. The thought was that Cooke was maybe trying to make it seem like Lucy had died from some type of incident while she was drunk. People now knew that they had a nighttime serial killer. Deemed the Night Caller, Cooke was out to terrorize and kill anyone that he could get his hands on, which the random killers like this are just absolutely terrifying. Anytime that a city is being stalked this way and people are scared out of their minds, I don't know why, but I always picture like one scene from the first movie, Scream, where at least one murder had already taken place, and there was like the group of kids like gathered and talking about the killer or the murderers, and the sun was setting, and I remember the music playing, and that stuff just always gives me the jeebies. The next attack came months later in June when a woman was in her bed in her Netlands apartment. She had left one of her windows open a crack, and this was enough for Cooke to make his move. He got into her apartment easily when the woman named Carmel Reed, or Red, woke up to a sound from inside of her home. Cooke then used an umbrella to stab the poor woman, and as she screamed, it scared Cooke off, and he fled. As the authorities were trying to find this night caller, sources said the authorities were working tirelessly, and during the investigation, more than 30,000 men, anyone over the age of 12, were fingerprinted, and over 60,000 .22 caliber rifles were test-fired in search of the gun they knew the serial killer to be using. The authorities had such a hard time figuring out who Cooke was or catching their serial killer because of the sheer randomness of his victims. There was no link, no victim profile, no MO, as the night caller used all sorts of methods to kill his victims. Stabbing, shooting, strangling, an axe, and other things to commit murders, let alone being able to link him to the hit and runs either. On August 10th, 1963, Cooke was on the hunt again as he entered a house where an 18-year-old Shirley MacLeod was babysitting that evening. Cooke shot the poor young woman as she had been sitting in a chair studying. The children, who she babysat's parents, came home that evening to find Shirley dead in their chair. Jesus fuck, can you imagine coming home after going out with your spouse and finding the young woman who was in charge of keeping your children safe just shot to death in your home? The panic and fear of what happened and not being able to get to your children's room fast enough after what you had just seen to check on them must have been one of the most gut-wrenching feelings in the world. Also, poor Shirley's parents, knowing that she was just watching over children for the night, studying, completely wholesome and innocent, and to hear that you lost your daughter, wondering, I'm sure, like, if she hadn't taken that babysitting gig, would she still be alive? Awful. Authorities would catch the break they so desperately needed when a .22 caliber rifle just happened to be randomly located in some bushes, and thankfully someone had to have called it in. The police used the gun and tested the ballistics to figure out that it was definitely the gun that was used to kill the young 18-year-old Shirley that same month. The authorities were smart, and they put an extremely similar weapon back, but this one didn't actually work, wanting to trap the night caller by watching for him to retrieve the gun. They also attached a fishing wire to the gun, I'm assuming to be alerted when Cooke came to grab it, as an officer sat in hiding near the gun, just patiently waiting. 17 days later, can you fucking imagine being the officer or officers who had to just sit there waiting day after day? At what point do you give up? Cooke came to grab his rifle, and this is when the authorities had finally caught the man terrorizing Perth for 4 years now. As he was caught, he first denied everything, saying that he didn't have anything to do with the crimes or murders, but eventually he broke down and confessed to 22 different violent crimes, 14 attempted murders, 8 confirmed murders, and over 250 break-ins with robberies. The detail in which he confessed his crimes were said to be incredible. While Cooke was on trial for the murder of John Sturkey, as this was the only one he was charged for, he had pled not guilty and used the reason of insanity. His lawyers tried to argue that Cooke had schizophrenia and did not know right from wrong. However, the prosecution would use the WA of Dr. Ark Ellis, director of state mental health services, who had testified that Cooke was not insane, but rather had a long history of resentment against society. The trial only lasted 3 days, where Cooke was found guilty of willful murder and handed the death sentence by hanging. Cooke, at this point, told his lawyers not to file any appeals on his behalf, saying that he now needed to pay for the crimes he had committed. Cooke would remain behind bars for just 13 months before he was taken to the gallows on October 26, 1964. Right before he was hung, he put his hand on a Bible to swear to the fact that he had killed the 2 victims that the other 2 men had been convicted of, exonerating them. After Cooke had been hanged, his wife Sally, mother of his children, had put in a handwritten note on her front door saying that Cooke had already been hanged and asking people to leave her family alone. I feel so bad for her. Eric Edgar Cooke was said to be the last man ever hanged in Western Australia. I guess before Cooke was executed, there were advocates who usually showed up to executions to refute them and protest them, but when it came to Cooke's execution, there was only one woman who showed up against it. About killing people, Eric Cooke would say, quote, "It wasn't an impulse, it was stronger than an impulse." And that, my friends, is the story of the night caller from Perth, Eric Edgar Cooke, serial killer, rapist, and piece of human shit. I cannot believe this fucker broke into over 250 houses. That's insane. It was giving real Golden State Killer vibes on a slightly lesser scale and a bit more random. I mean, this guy just went in with the intention of killing whoever the fuck he found inside, and that's terrifying. He also seemed to be escalating right up to the point of murder, but this is one of those cases for me where I personally feel a monster was created, not necessarily born, right? Not just the bullying, because plenty of people are bullied incessantly and they don't become killers, although I can only imagine that fueled his anger for sure. But also the abuse from his father against himself, more so than his siblings or his mother. I mean, this is just one of those cases where you're left wondering if he would have been a killer either way, or would he have been completely different had he not grown up with such a piece of shit dad and rejected by so many people? We know a lot of stories, unfortunately, of people who are picked on and bullied who do end up being killers in one way or another, right? It doesn't seem to be something that people can stop. I can only hope that it's getting better, but I can tell you from my own experiences with my children and what they witness at their schools, it's not getting better. Kids are just sneakier about it, and social media plays a huge part in it nowadays. Kids are fucking assholes to each other, and it's the worst. As adults, we know how sad some kids' situations are, and we might even feel bad for them or wish that they could get help. The sad fact of the matter is that some people just don't give a shit enough about their kids to help or stop them, or even give enough attention to them to grow up to be healthy, although no one is perfect by any means. It's just all around sad when kids are left to their own choices, because if we adults can't even make good choices, how the fuck are we expecting kids to? Well, I hope you guys enjoyed learning about this fucked up case as much as I did, and remember to not only lock your doors and windows at night, but don't fucking pick on people when it goes past the lovingly teasing. You never know what the consequences could be. Come on back next Monday when we will cover another case here on The Kill File where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.